The Henderson farm has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather purchased these 120 acres in 1947 after returning from the Pacific, determined to build something lasting from the chaos of war. My father expanded it through the 70s and 80s, and now it falls to me to preserve what they built. I have spent every sunrise of my adult life walking these fields, feeling the soil between my fingers, and maintaining the legacy my family entrusted to me. This land is not just property. It is the physical manifestation of my family history, captured in every furrow, fence post, and farmhouse floorboard. For decades, our nearest neighbors were the Johnsons 2 miles down the road. We existed in the comfortable isolation of rural America, where property lines were respected without question, and neighborly disputes were settled face to face with a handshake. That changed 5 years ago when developers purchased the old Wilson property that bordered our eastern field. Within 18 months, the rolling pastures transformed into Oak Ridge Estates, a luxury development with homes starting at 7 figures, and an unnecessarily complex homeowners association rulebook that reportedly exceeded 200 pages. Initially, the relationship was cordial if distant. Occasionally, residents would wave when I drove my tractor near the property line, and one family even asked if they could purchase fresh eggs directly from our henhouse. The invisible barrier between our worlds remained largely intact until about 6 months ago when the HOA elected a new president, Patricia Winters. Neighbors referred to her as Mrs. Winters in her presence, but whispered Karen when she was out of earshot. She first appeared at my door on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays are when I maintain equipment, and my hands were black with tractor grease when I answered her sharp, rapid knocking. Patricia stood on my porch in clothing that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, massive sunglasses covering half her face despite the cloudy day, and a Porsche Cayenne parked behind her in my gravel driveway. "Your roosters are disturbing our residents," she announced without introduction. "The noise ordinance clearly states that nuisance animals must be controlled. I will need you to remove them by the end of the week." I explained, attempting patience, that my property was agricultural zoned and exempt from residential noise ordinances, and furthermore, that roosters had occupied this property since before she was born. She left with a dismissive wave and what would become her signature phrase: "We will see about that." We would indeed see about many things in the coming months. The first sign of trouble appeared in my eastern wheat field. Crossing the property during my morning inspection, I discovered distinctive tire tracks cutting directly through nearly 50 yards of crops. Not the familiar pattern of my own tractors or trucks, but the unmistakable tread of high-performance SUV tires. The following morning revealed fresh tracks in the same location, and after a week, an actual dirt path had begun to form through my carefully planted field. Confused and increasingly concerned, I installed a trail camera secured to an old oak tree overlooking the area. 3 days later, I had my answer. The footage clearly showed a Porsche Cayenne, the same vehicle Patricia had parked in my driveway, driving directly through my crops, using my farm as a shortcut between Oak Ridge Estates and the main highway. The timestamps indicated she did this twice daily during rush hour, saving herself approximately 8 minutes compared to the legal route through the subdivision. I intercepted her the following evening, standing at the property line as her Porsche approached across my field. When I flagged her down, her window lowered just enough to hear my concerns. "Mrs. Winters, you are driving across private property and damaging my crops. I need you to stop immediately." She removed her sunglasses slowly, examining me with the detached interest one might show an unusual insect. "This path has been used for years. There is an unwritten easement here. Everyone knows that." No, there is not. This is private property. Well, someone should have informed me before I purchased in the community. Consider this a grandfathered access point. Now, if you will excuse me, I have an important dinner reservation. The window rose, and she accelerated away, wheels spinning deliberately in my soft soil, destroying another few square feet of wheat. As dust settled around me, I realized this was merely the opening salvo in what would become an increasingly bitter territorial dispute, one that pitted generations of rural respect against suburban entitlement, where the battle lines were literally being carved through my family legacy with each passing of her Porsche's wheels. The morning after confronting Patricia, I drove to the county records of Vice. The clerk, Martha, greeted me by name, one advantage of small-town living where the same families have occupied the same positions for decades. I requested copies of my property survey, deed, and any recorded easements. 3 hours and $40 in copying fees later, I had comprehensive documentation confirming what I already knew. There were no easements, rights of way, or public access points crossing my eastern field. The property line between my farm and Oak Ridge estates was clear, unambiguous, and indisputable. Armed with documentation, I returned home and drafted a formal letter. I kept the language simple, professional, and direct. I explained that my trail cameras had documented her repeated trespassing. I included printed photographs of her vehicle crossing my property, timestamps clearly visible in the corner. I cited the relevant property boundaries with attached survey documentation. I concluded by respectfully requesting that she cease driving across my land immediately, or I would be forced to take additional steps to protect my property rights. I sent the letter via certified mail requiring signature confirmation. The return receipt arrived 3 days later with her angular signature scrawled across it. Problem solved, I thought naively. Surely a formal notice backed by legal documentation would resolve this misunderstanding. The next morning, I watched through my kitchen window as not one but 5 luxury vehicles parked along my eastern fence line. Patricia emerged from her Porsche, accompanied by 4 individuals in business casual attire clutching tablets and clipboards. They marched onto my property without hesitation, surveying the path their HOA president had illegally established through my crops. I approached the group, property documentation in hand. "Excuse me, you are trespassing on private property." "Mr. Henderson," Patricia addressed me without turning from her inspection of the dirt path. "Allow me to introduce the Oak Ridge Estates HOA Board. We are conducting an official site assessment of the community access route." A balding man in his 60s extended his hand. "Richard Thornton, HOA Vice President. There seems to be some confusion about historical access rights." "There is no confusion," I replied, refusing the handshake and instead holding up my documentation. "This is private farmland. There has never been a public access route through this property. Our community charter clearly references established pathways connecting to public thoroughfares." A younger woman chimed in, reading directly from her tablet. "This constitutes a historical right-of-way under County Ordinance Section 47.3. That ordinance applies to paths established before 1964 and formally recorded with the county," I countered. "This is not that. This is someone driving through my wheat field because it saves them 8 minutes on their commute." Patricia smiled thinly. "The HOA legal team will be in touch, Mr. Henderson. Community interests supersede individual inconvenience. In the meantime, we will continue utilizing the access route as established." After they departed, I walked the property line, photographing the clear tread marks where they had deliberately driven further into my field. The confrontation left me unsettled but resolved. That evening, I contacted an attorney I knew, Mike Lawson, who had helped with my parents' estate planning years earlier. His assessment was unequivocal. They do not have a legal leg to stand on, James. Not even a toe. But HOAs are notorious for using intimidation and the threat of expensive legal battles to get their way. They are counting on you not having the resources to fight them. The following week confirmed Mike's assessment of HOA tactics. First came the trash, coffee cups, fast food wrappers, and cigarette butts appeared along the property line, clearly thrown from passing vehicles. Then came complaints to the county about agricultural odors affecting residential property values. A county inspector appeared, apologetic but required to investigate. He found nothing actionable but warned me that multiple complaints had been filed. Most disturbing was the discovery of an Oak Ridge Estates community newsletter left conspicuously in my mailbox. In it, a colored map showed what they called Community Access Road B, cutting directly through my property, described as historic access to Highway 27 through undeveloped land. The deliberate mischaracterization of my actively farmed fields as undeveloped land ignited a slow-burning fury within me. One evening, while picking up more trash along my fence line, I discovered an Oak Ridge resident walking her dog on my property. When I politely informed her she was trespassing, her response stunned me. "But Mrs. Winters told everyone at the community meeting that you had agreed to let us use this path. She said you were being compensated by the HOA for the access." This blatant lie confirmed that Patricia was not merely trespassing herself, but encouraging the entire community to violate my property rights under false pretenses. Later that night, I called Mike again. "Document everything," he advised. "Every trespass, every piece of trash, every communication. Take dated photographs. Save the newsletter. Record conversations if legal in your state. We are beyond simple trespassing now. This is a coordinated attempt to establish adverse possession. They are trying to legally steal your land." As I hung up the phone, I stared out at the moonlit fields my grandfather had purchased with his war bonds. The distinct sound of an engine caught my attention. Headlights cut through my wheat field as Patricia's Porsche made its evening shortcut across my property. Brights deliberately left on to announce her continued defiance. I knew then that reasonable approaches had failed. It was time to escalate my defense of 3 generations of Henderson land. The morning sun glinted off the metal, "No trespassing" signs I hammered into posts along my eastern property line. Bright red letters declared "private property" and "violators will be prosecuted" every 50 feet surrounding the illegal path. The county sheriff had advised this as the first step in establishing clear notice against trespassing. By sunset, I had installed 16 signs and 4 trail cameras with improved night vision capabilities, carefully concealed in trees and brush overlooking the makeshift road. The next morning, I discovered that 8 signs had vanished overnight. 3 days later, all 16 were gone, metal posts and all. Reviewing the security footage provided a predictable but infuriating answer. The cameras captured Patricia and 2 men I recognized from the HOA board systematically removing my signs under cover of darkness, loading them into the back of a Range Rover. Their faces were clearly visible, as was their deliberate destruction of private property. More troubling than the removal of my signs was what the footage revealed about daytime traffic. What had begun as Patricia's solitary shortcut had evolved into a steady stream of Oak Ridge residents following her example. My cameras documented 27 different vehicles crossing my property in a single day. Mercedes sedans, BMW SUVs, and Audi crossovers followed the widening dirt path that now cut an 8-foot swath through my wheat field. The crop damage had become substantial. I walked the path with my tablet, calculating losses. Beyond the immediately visible damage to wheat plants, the soil compaction from regular vehicle traffic would impact future growing seasons. Agricultural equipment would need to work around the damaged section, decreasing efficiency. If the pattern continued, I estimated losses exceeding $10,000 annually. Mike prepared a formal cease and desist letter outlining specific legal violations and potential damages. We sent copies to Patricia personally, the HOA board collectively, and the property management company overseeing Oak Ridge Estates. The response arrived 3 days later on HOA letterhead with their attorney's signature. Oak Ridge Estates categorically rejects your characterization of the access route in question. The pathway represents a pre-existing thoroughfare documented in historical survey records. Furthermore, your aggressive placement of signage violates multiple aesthetic and safety provisions outlined in county code. Any attempt to obstruct resident access will result in immediate legal action. The letter concluded with a threat to seek damages for malicious interference with community operations and deliberate property devaluation through agricultural eyesores. It was legal gibberish designed to intimidate, as Mike immediately confirmed, but it signaled their willingness to engage in protracted conflict rather than respect clear property rights. 2 days after receiving their response, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was an HOA violation notice on Oak Ridge letterhead. It cited me for unsightly farm equipment visible from development properties and demanded I remove my tractors from my own fields or face daily fines. It was laughable from a legal perspective. They had absolutely no authority over my agricultural property, but it represented a new phase in their harassment campaign. More notices followed. Violations for excessive animal noise, improper waste management, and unauthorized commercial activity arrived weekly, each threatening escalating fines. I documented each notice, adding them to my growing file of evidence. The blatant harassment strategy confirmed that Patricia was willing to use any means to force compliance with her demands. The situation deteriorated further when residents began treating my entire property as an extension of their community space. I discovered dog waste along the path, picnic trash near my pond, and even a Makes Hift children's fort constructed using lumber taken from my own storage shed. When I installed a chain across the illegal road entrance, it was cut within hours. When I placed large boulders as barriers, they were somehow dragged aside overnight. My kitchen table transformed into a war room of documentation. I maintained a detailed log of every trespass captured on camera, organized by vehicle and timestamp. I photographed all property damage with date stamps and GPS coordinates. I recorded every interaction with Oak Ridge residents, all trash dumped on my property, and each fraudulent HOA violation notice. I compiled license plate information, driver descriptions, and pattern analysis showing the increasing frequency of trespassing incidents. Most concerningly, I documented visible changes to my crops near the path. Wheat stalks grew stunted where soil had been compacted by constant traffic. Areas where vehicles regularly turned showed increasing erosion. The path itself had widened from an initial tire-width trail to a miniature dirt road nearly 12 feet across where multiple vehicles had needed to pass each other. Watching the footage one evening, I observed Patricia drive directly through a muddy section, her Porsche spraying soil across surrounding crops before she accelerated onto the main road. The deliberate nature of the property damage was unmistakable. She slowed specifically to spin her wheels in the softest sections, maximizing destruction before speeding away. That night, I added a new, expensive security camera system with higher resolution and improved night vision coverage. I installed motion-activated floodlights at key points along the property line. I renewed my no trespassing signs, this time cementing the posts 4 feet deep and reinforcing them with steel bars. Each sign now included the specific legal statute regarding criminal trespassing and property damage. As I reviewed my extensive documentation that evening, I realized I had transformed from a simple farmer protecting his land into something closer to a legal investigator building a case. My weathered hands, more accustomed to soil and seeds, now meticulously labeled evidence folders and maintained chain of custody for digital files. The quiet farmer had become a strategic opponent, preparing for inevitable confrontation with a woman who had severely underestimated both my resolve and my patience. The weather forecast predicted heavy rain for the coming week. I glanced at the deeply rutted, unauthorized road cutting through my field and allowed myself a small smile. Nature sometimes has its own way of delivering consequences for those who refuse to respect boundaries, and my cameras would be watching, documenting whatever unfolded when Patricia's precious Porsche encountered the reality of farming terrain in inclement weather. The storm arrived with dramatic intensity on Thursday afternoon. Rain hammered against my farmhouse windows as thunder rumbled across darkening skies. Weather alerts warned of flash flooding potential, with 3 to 5 inches expected overnight. I watched water pool in the low spots of my fields, thinking about the makeshift road that Patricia and her followers had carved through my property. The packed dirt that had supported luxury vehicles in dry weather was rapidly transforming into a muddy trap. From my office window overlooking the eastern field, I observed the rain intensifying. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes, revealing sheets of water cascading down the gentle slope where Oak Ridge Estates met my property line. The unauthorized road had become a small stream, water cutting new channels through the already damaged soil. By early evening, what had been merely wet ground had transformed into treacherous mud 6 inches deep in some sections. I knew what would likely happen. Patricia maintained a rigid schedule, returning from her office in the city between 6:30 and 7:00 p.m. each weekday. The proper route through Oak Ridge Estates would add 8 minutes to her commute but keep her on paved roads. The shortcut through my property would save those precious minutes but require traversing what had become an agricultural mud pit. At 6:47 p.m., my security system alerted me to motion at the eastern property line. Through the rain-streaked camera feed, I watched headlights approach, the distinctive pattern of a Porsche Cayenne. Despite the clearly hazardous conditions, Patricia had chosen to attempt her usual trespass across my saturated fields. I observed her vehicle hesitate briefly at the entrance to the mud-covered path before proceeding forward with apparent confidence in German engineering. The Porsche made it approximately 30 yards before physics and agriculture combined to assert themselves. The vehicle lurched sideways as its right tires sank into a particularly soft section. Patricia attempted to accelerate through the difficulty. Precisely the W. Wrong approach in mud. The wheels spun uselessly, digging the vehicle deeper with each rotation. After several attempts at rocking the SUV forward and backward, the Porsche settled axle-deep in mud, its underbody now resting directly on the saturated earth. My phone rang at 6:52 p.m. An unfamiliar number displayed on the screen, but I had little doubt about the caller. "Henderson Farm," I answered calmly. "Your field has damaged my vehicle." Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I need you to come immediately with a tractor to pull me out. Mrs. Winters, are you calling to report that you are trespassing on my property? Again. Do not play games with me, she snapped. This situation is entirely your fault. You know people use this road. You deliberately failed to maintain it or post warnings about hazardous conditions. The absurdity of her statement momentarily left me speechless. She had illegally created an unauthorized path through my private property, ignored multiple notices to cease trespassing, removed warning signs, and now demanded I rescue her from the natural consequences of her actions. Mrs. Winters, you are currently trespassing on clearly marked private property during hazardous weather conditions. I can call a towing service for you, at your expense, or you can call one yourself. Those are your options. Lightning flashed, followed by an immediate crack of thunder directly overhead. Through the phone, I could hear the storm raging around her. Do you have any idea who I am? Her voice rose to compete with the downpour. I will destroy you financially. The HOA legal team will bury you in lawsuits. Your precious farm will be foreclosed before Christmas. Mrs. Winters, I am recording this conversation, I informed her, activating my phone's recording function. To be clear, you are aware you are on private property without permission, correct? Of course I am on your stupid property. I drive through here twice every day. Everyone in Oak Ridge uses this road. We have been using it for months. Her admission, now captured in her own words, was precisely what my attorney had advised me to secure. In her anger, she had just confessed to repeated, deliberate trespassing. And you removed my no trespassing signs, I continued calmly. I have footage of that as well. Those signs were illegally placed. They violated community standards and created an eyesore visible from development properties. Each statement further incriminated her. I almost felt sorry for how thoroughly she was burying herself legally, but my sympathy was limited by months of property damage and harassment. A tow truck will cost approximately $250 in these conditions, I informed her. Would you like me to call one for you? The stream of obscenities that followed confirmed her answer was negative. She disconnected the call. I donned my rain gear and boots and walked to the edge of my property, where I could observe her situation without trespassing onto the muddy path itself. Through the downpour, I could see Patricia standing beside her stranded Porsche, designer outfit soaked through, attempting to direct someone on her phone while sheltering under a small umbrella that provided minimal protection against the sideways rain. When she spotted me, she immediately stormed in my direction, designer boots slipping in the mud with each step. Her perfectly styled hair now clung to her face in wet strands, mascara creating dark rivulets down her cheeks. The transformation from polished HOA president to drowned fury was remarkable. You did this on purpose, she screamed over the storm, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. You knew this would happen. I raised my phone, continuing to record. Mrs. Winters, to confirm, you deliberately drove onto my clearly marked private property despite multiple written notices not to trespass, correct? Her response was another barrage of threats involving her husband's connections to county commissioners, her brother-in-law's position at a prominent law firm, and her personal friendship with the mayor. Each statement revealed the web of privilege and protection she believed insulated her from consequences. I maintained my calm, allowing her to continue her self-incriminating tirade while my phone captured every word. A tow truck arrived 30 minutes later, not one I had called but apparently summoned by Patricia herself. The driver, recognizing my property, approached me first rather than her. "Need permission to bring my rig onto your land, Mr. Henderson," he said respectfully. "Don't want to trespass." "I grant permission for you to recover the vehicle only," I specified, "and only if you stay on the existing mud path." As the tow operator worked to extract the Porsche, now sunk even deeper from Patricia's attempts to free it, I walked my property line with a flashlight. The storm had briefly subsided, allowing me to inspect what the wait had revealed. Near where the unauthorized path entered my property, I discovered something disturbing. Several of my property's survey markers had been moved approximately 15 feet inward from their legal positions. Someone had deliberately attempted to alter the physical evidence of my property boundaries to support their false claims of access rights. I documented this new violation carefully, understanding it elevated the situation from simple trespassing to potential criminal tampering with survey markers, a much more serious offense in our county. As the tow truck finally extracted Patricia's mud-covered Porsche, its undercarriage scraping loudly across my ruined field, I knew we had reached a turning point. The time for passive documentation had ended. Tomorrow would begin a new, more assertive phase in protecting my family's legacy from those who believed their convenience outweighed 3 generations of Henderson property rights. The morning after the storm, I contacted Mike Lawson with an update and the new evidence. Rather than our usual phone call, he suggested meeting in person with a colleague who specialized in land use disputes. That afternoon, I found myself in the wood-paneled office of Sanders and Lawson, seated across from Mike and a white-haired attorney named Walter Brooks. Walter had the weathered complexion of someone who spent weekends outdoors despite his professional attire. He listened silently as I presented my documentation, occasionally nodding or making brief notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had seen this story before. "Mrs. Winters has made 3 critical mistakes," Walter explained, tapping my evidence folders. "First, removing survey markers is a Class B misdemeanor in this county, punishable by up to 6 months' imprisonment. Second, her recorded admission of deliberate, repeated trespassing elevates this from civil to criminal territory. Third, she documented her own illegal activities in official HOA communications, creating liability for the entire organization." "So we have a strong case," I confirmed. "We have a howitzer in a knife fight," Walter replied with a slight smile. "But we need to be strategic. Mrs. Winters clearly has political connections, which explains why the sheriff has been reluctant to treat this as criminal trespassing despite your evidence." Mike nodded in agreement. "The question becomes, how do we overcome that protection while permanently solving your property access issue?" For the next 2 hours, we reviewed county regulations regarding private roads, easements, and property access. Walter pulled out dusty municipal code books, land use regulations, and regional maps that appeared to predate my grandfather's original purchase. His methodical research revealed a crucial detail hidden in the county archives. "Your property has an existing registered easement from 1952, Walter announced, pointing to a faded document. "Your grandfather granted the county a maintenance easement along your western boundary to access the water management district. It was never developed into an actual road because the county established access through the Wilson property instead." "The property that became Oak Ridge Estates," I noted. "Precisely, but the legal easement remains valid and registered. This changes everything." Walter explained that I had the right to develop this existing legal easement into a proper private road. Since the easement predated modern zoning regulations, I would be grandfathered under simplified permitting requirements. Furthermore, as a recognized agricultural property, I qualified for expedited approval under rural infrastructure improvement provisions. You can create a legitimate private road on your own property, following your own route, Walter concluded. And while you cannot legally restrict a privately established road to specific individuals, you can require users to follow posted rules and regulations. That afternoon, I drove to the sheriff's office to file formal reports of criminal trespassing, tampering with survey markers, and property damage. Despite the overwhelming evidence I presented, including video footage and Patricia's recorded confession, Deputy Sheriff Reynolds appeared uncomfortable. "Look, Mr. Henderson," he said quietly, "I understand your frustration, but the county attorney tends to view these as civil disputes between neighbors. Even with this evidence, I cannot guarantee charges will be filed." "Because of Mrs. Winter's political connections," I stated directly. His silence confirmed my suspicion. Patricia's husband served on the county zoning board, her brother-in-law was partners with the county attorney, and she personally chaired the mayor's re-election campaign. The system designed to protect property rights was compromised by the very connections she had boasted about during her rain-soaked tirade. "File the reports anyway," I insisted. "Create the official record. I want documentation that I reported these crimes, even if nothing comes of it initially." That evening, I spread maps across my dining room table, tracing the original western easement with my finger while considering Walter's insights. The existing legal easement ran parallel to my property line, eventually connecting to the county road system, approximately a quarter-mile south of the sheriff's office and courthouse complex. With careful planning and minor adjustments to the route, a properly constructed private road could direct all traffic directly past the sheriff's department before reaching the main highway. I began calculating costs: gravel base, proper drainage culverts, signage, cattle gates at entry points. Walter had recommended installing automated cameras to record all vehicles using the private road, with clear notices informing drivers they were being recorded. I sketched potential routes, weighing agricultural impact against strategic positioning. By midnight, a comprehensive plan had emerged, one that would require significant investment, but would permanently resolve the property dispute on my terms. The following morning, heavy construction equipment arrived at my farm, leased from a contractor who owed my family a favor from when my father had helped him through a difficult season. I had already submitted expedited permits for agricultural access improvement utilizing existing county easement, with the supporting documentation Walter had prepared. The paperwork emphasized crop protection, runoff management, and restoration of damaged fields, all legitimate agricultural concerns that qualified for rapid approval. As I walked the proposed route with the project foreman, marking the path with survey flags, I felt a sense of reclaiming control. For months, I had documented, reported, and attempted reasonable resolution, while Patricia and her followers had damaged my property with impunity. Now I was taking assertive action within the full bounds of the law, turning her own sense of entitlement into the perfect trap for someone who believed rules applied to others but not to herself. "We will need approximately 10 days for basic construction," the foreman estimated, "assuming weather cooperates and permits clear without delays." "The permits will clear," I assured him, thinking of Walter's confidence and the legitimacy of our approach. "Focus on completing the section near the eastern property line first." As I turned to leave, my phone displayed an incoming call from an Oak Ridge Estates number I did not recognize. The neighboring development had just discovered my construction project, and the battle was about to enter its final phase. The rhythmic beeping of reversing construction equipment provided background music to my morning coffee. 5 days into the project, the western access road had taken clear shape. A proper gravel base extended from my main driveway along the old easement line, curving strategically toward the county highway system. Survey stakes marked the remaining route, with culverts and drainage systems already installed at key points. The foreman approached as I inspected the progress, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. County inspector came by yesterday afternoon, said it was some of the best private road work he had seen in years. Permits are fully approved and filed. Excellent, I replied, examining the compacted gravel surface. How soon can we complete the eastern section? 2 days for basic function, another 3 for finishing work, signage, and security installations. Prioritize the eastern connection, I instructed. That needs to be functional first. I had anticipated the HOA's reaction, but even I was surprised by their speed. At precisely 10:17 a.m., a convoy of luxury vehicles parked along my property line. Patricia emerged from her freshly cleaned Porsche Cayenne, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios. They marched directly toward the construction equipment, oblivious to the no trespassing signs and security cameras documenting their approach. I intercepted them at the property line. Mrs. Winters, you and your associates are not welcome on this property. Any entry will constitute criminal trespassing. We have an emergency injunction, she announced triumphantly, as one of the suits thrust papers toward me. This construction project illegally restricts established community access and must cease immediately pending court review. I accepted the documents without comment, having been briefed by Walter about this likely tactic. The emergency injunction was merely a filing notice for a requested hearing, not an actual court order. The distinction was crucial, but one Patricia clearly hoped I would not understand. This is not a valid injunction, I stated calmly. It is a notice of a hearing request. Construction will continue as permitted by the HOA. NTY. Now please leave my property immediately. Her composure fractured briefly before she regained control. We are conducting an official inspection of the controversial construction project. The HOA has rights to review any changes that impact community access. You have no such rights, I countered. This is private property with fully approved permits for agricultural access improvements. Your inspection has not been requested or approved. This is your final warning to leave. The men in suits exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing they lacked legal authority to remain. Patricia, however, stormed past me toward the construction site, her designer heels inappropriate for the soft ground surrounding the new roadway. This is completely unacceptable, she shouted as workers paused their equipment to observe the confrontation. This road deliberately circumvents the established community access point. Mrs. Winters, I called after her, my phone recording every moment, you are now criminally trespassing on posted private property. Do you understand you are breaking the law? I am inspecting an unauthorized construction project that interferes with community right-of way, she insisted, approaching the foreman who had wisely shut down his equipment. He tipped his hard hat respectfully before speaking. Ma'am, I cannot allow unauthorized personnel in an active construction zone. Insurance regulations require all visitors to have approved safety equipment and signed waivers. Do you know who I am? She demanded, hands on hips. Yes, ma'am, he replied calmly. You are someone trespassing in my construction zone without proper authorization, safety equipment, or liability coverage, and my dash cams are recording this entire interaction. Indeed, every vehicle and piece of equipment on site was equipped with multiple camera angles, capturing Patricia's unauthorized entry and belligerent behavior. Her lawyers, still standing at the property line, called for her to return, visibly concerned about the legal implications of her actions. "This will not stand," she declared, jabbing a finger toward me as she reluctantly retreated. "The HOA will fight this all the way to the state Supreme Court if necessary." "I look forward to presenting my evidence in any court," I replied calmly.